When you hear the name Europe, which cities come to your mind? I'm sure most people think of Paris, London, Barcelona, or Rome. Very few people think of Belgrade, Sofia, Minsk, or others. But these cities are also in Europe. This is what divides Europe into two parts, Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Western Europe is known for its rich and developed economy, where the GDP per capita is around $61,000. In contrast, Eastern Europe has a GDP per capita of only $14,000. If we look at GNI per capita, which shows average annual income, the red areas on the map show where the income levels are lowest, and the green areas show where the income levels are highest. You can clearly see that all high-income areas are in Western Europe, while low-income areas are in Eastern Europe. Europe has clear economic lines that have not changed since World War II. But why is that? Even though they are on the same continent, why is there such a difference between Eastern and Western Europe? The history and geography of Europe play a big role in this divide. Today we will see how Eastern Europe became so poor while Western Europe became so rich. Despite being the second smallest continent, Europe has remained the most powerful continent in the 21st century. Many major economic powers are still in Europe, giving it a strong influence on world politics. If we look at a map of Europe, the south has the Mediterranean, Black Sea and Caspian Sea. The north has the Arctic Ocean and the west has the Atlantic Ocean. Ireland and Iceland in the Atlantic Ocean are also part of Europe, and Greenland is culturally and politically connected to Europe. Now the question is, why is there such a difference in the development of Eastern and Western Europe, despite their cultural, religious and geographical connections? To understand this, we need to go back 80 years after World War II, when Europe looked like this. The green areas were European countries with democracy and capitalist societies, while the red areas were countries under direct Soviet control or influenced by Soviet communist ideology. Socialism, or communist ideology, means that the government should control all resources, businesses and land. This way, instead of just a few people becoming rich, everyone in society should have equal opportunities and returns. Healthcare, education and housing should be equal for all. The problem with this ideology is that people had no incentive to start businesses or invent new things because the government controlled all profits and returns. The government owned any business and it would distribute profits equally among people. So why would someone work harder when everyone gets the same? In contrast, in a capitalist society, people have the freedom to run their own businesses, earn profits, and the government only takes a small portion as tax. During this time, very few Western Europeans came to Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europeans believed that Western Europe was an evil capitalist society, so they didn't go there either. But from 1945 to 1991, Western Europe advanced far ahead of Eastern Europe based on capitalist ideology. Then, in 1991, with the collapse of communism, the Soviet Union broke apart, and all the European states under Soviet control became free. However, after more than 30 years, Eastern Europe is still economically behind Western Europe. But why? A big part of this is Eastern Europe's geography. Eastern Europe is between two extremes. On one side, there are flatlands like Ukraine, Poland and Belarus, which are very good for agriculture. But on the other side, these flat countries are easy targets for enemies to attack. That's why these three countries have always been conflict centers in Europe. Poland is perhaps the most invaded country in Europe, targeted by every empire, whether Swedish, Ottoman or Soviet. Without mountains, it has always been easy for outsiders to invade and loot these Eastern European countries, and thus, despite having fertile land, they couldn't benefit much from agricultural production because invaders would destroy them regularly. On the other extreme, in southeastern Europe, there are the Balkan countries, where mountains make construction and infrastructure development very difficult, making them the most backward in Eastern Europe. From a peace and stability perspective, Eastern Europe has been very volatile. Since 1991, all conflicts in Europe have happened in Eastern Europe, affecting not just their economies, but also immigration rates. During the Yugoslav wars, millions left the Balkan countries for Western Europe, leading to a shortage of skilled workers. In the recent Russia-Ukraine war, massive immigration has also occurred, raising questions about Eastern Europe's future. But if I talk about the most important factor that makes Eastern Europe's geography unfavorable, it's access to seas. Western European countries have the big advantage of being surrounded by seas. In the northeast, there is the Baltic Sea. In the west, the North Sea and the Atlantic Ocean. And in the south, the Mediterranean Sea. That's why in the 16th century, these Western European countries had the opportunity to discover trade routes and new continents through these seas, establish colonies, and then bring back resources from those colonies. The British, Spanish, and French empires did this, controlling 40% of the world's wealth. Access to the seas was also why the Ottoman Empire ruled for hundreds of years. Back then, any country with a port was considered powerful. While Western Europe controlled world trade through seas, Eastern Europe was like a landlord, almost cut off from global trade. The Eastern European countries that did have sea access were in locations where they had to pass through choke points to reach the rest of the world. For example, Poland and other countries had to go through the Danish Strait to reach the Atlantic Ocean, and since it was controlled by Sweden and Germany, they charged fees to pass. Similarly, Southeast European countries had to pass through the Bosporus Strait, which was controlled by the Ottoman Empire, and then cross the Strait of Gibraltar, which was sometimes under Muslim, Spanish or Ottoman control. So Eastern Europe was heavily dependent on Western Europe for sea trade. Later, Western Europe discovered huge reserves of oil and gas in the North Sea in the 20th century. These reserves made Norway, Britain, the Netherlands and Germany the powerhouses of the 21st century. On the other hand, Eastern Europe was not as lucky with natural resources, and besides fertile land, no significant natural reserves were discovered. But Eastern Europe isn't completely depressed. Its agricultural production is so strong that if communism hadn't come, Eastern Europe might have been the world's food basket after 1991, when these countries separated from the Soviet Union. However, the effects of communism lingered for many years. Only Poland, the Czech Republic and Romania managed to develop because they became members of the European Union. Now, why couldn't the other countries become members of the European Union? The answer is that joining the EU has certain requirements, and one major condition is the level of corruption. If we map the top 10 most corrupt countries in Europe, you will see they are all in Eastern Europe. It's not that Western Europe has no corruption, but it's not beyond the level of national interest. That's why Western Europe has ruled the world until now, and even today, thousands of young people in our subcontinent dream of going to Europe, becoming residents there, and securing their future generations' lives. So, all in all, geography and communism are two things that have prevented Eastern Europe from being as rich as Western Europe. They say everyone gets their day, and what is on the floor today can be on the throne tomorrow. Something similar is going to happen with Eastern Europe. The biggest example is Poland, which has been the poorest country in Europe. But today, it is quickly becoming Europe's next superpower, and we have discussed Poland's transformation in this video. You will find the link at the end of today's video. Many economies in Western Europe are rapidly heading towards collapse, with Ireland being a prime example. Its GDP per capita is the highest in Europe after Luxembourg, yet people are now leaving. But why is that? What is happening in Ireland that no one wants to live in the richest country? To know the reasons, be sure to watch this video. See you in the next video with another interesting topic. Take care. Goodbye.